Okay, today we're going to talk about data cleaning and tidy data in a very broad sense. So not specifically about how we code it, but just kind of the principles that we use as we do that. So as always, I'm using slides that I got from Dr. Thatcher because he makes awesome slides. I'm also going to show you a handout that I have. It's attached to this video, I think, which really does walk through sort of the ideas of reproducible data and why tidy data is important, and kind of some principles that can be used here to make this all work. So let me start here. Go ahead and open up the clean Kim data file. We used it before in the lab. I have it attached, I think, to this assignment, so you can get to it as well. And if you pull it up, you can just open it up in Excel or your favorite spreadsheet. And if you look at it, you might just want to look and see if there are any problems. Are there things, I could have given you the link to the questions, but most of them are pretty straightforward. Cups of coffee is, how many cups of coffee do you have in a day? How many calories do you have in a day? How many hours a day do you spend working per week? Those sorts of things. So go ahead and take a look at it and just scribble down a couple of things that you see wrong with it. And in fact, you can share that with me a little bit later. Anyway, I'll wait. Okay, so if you had a chance to look at it, you'll see that there's several problems in the data, including a bunch of empty ones. So in the cups of coffee variable, are these people who don't drink coffee? Are they people who skip the question? Whatever. You can actually see there were several misspelled words in the do you like cats or dogs better? Like CST isn't actually how you spell cat or dog. The questions about cell phones were added later, so the first 200 rows or so don't have any values in there. And anyway, if you go through, you can see that there's actually several problems with this data set that would come back to haunt you if you were doing that. And so certainly we want to think about keeping data in a really organized way so that we can clean it, correct mistakes, do those sorts of things. We also might want to think about what I did before. Maybe I do work on a data set and then I'm going to put it away, and 6 months later or next year I get the new data from this year and I want to add it to the past data and think about that. And there's actually a good joke from Karen Cranston, who's a data scientist, which is your main collaborator is yourself, and me from 2 months ago never responds to the emails that I send. And this is a good reason why we want to be really organized. Certainly we want to think about defending our results. We want to think about how we're going to convince other people that our results are good. But there's also the idea of reminding yourself what you did with it. How do we document things so that future me will not be mad at current me, which by then will be past me? Some problems have to do with how the data itself is kept. We find an impossible value. If you look through that data set, you'll find there was a size 114 shoe, which either means the person uses some other shoe size format than we use, but in fact, even around the world, I don't think there's any format where a size 114 shoe would be common. My guess is that it was either a size 11 shoe or a size 14 shoe that someone just typed in wrong. You might see some unexpected values. Maybe somebody has a size 25 shoe. That size exists, but that would be, certainly a rare enough case that you would think that somebody might have noticed that. Certainly regular typos, things misspelled. Sometimes data's just missing. Sometimes the data's in the wrong format. We've already talked in R about how data is typically either in a numeric form, a character form, or in a factor. And you could imagine that all your numbers are there, but they're in character form. So when you go to do a mean or a standard deviation, it won't let you do that because it says these aren't numbers, and you have to figure out how to get them into the format that you need. Sometimes we have problems that come from how we collect the data. If you had bad questions, you get bad results. Or we don't know what the variables actually mean. Were these calories per day, calories per week, something like that? And was it collected in a consistent way or in a way that makes it likely to be accurate? Now, as the coder, it's hard to figure out what we're going to do to figure that out, but that is the sort of thing you want to do. On the handout I have a little sheet here a little image from Roger Peng, who's a biostatistician at Johns Hopkins. And he talks about the research pipeline, which of course not all our data is research, but the idea that the data is collected somehow, then stuff is done to that. And this is the part where we're usually active, this green box, we as data scientists. Then it's turned into some communicatable results here in gold. And the idea is that often the blue data we don't have any control over, or if we did, it was a long time ago, but we want to get from the blue part to the gold part in a way that's totally reproducible, that we can explain, that someone else could take our same data and they could get the same results from there. Cool, so if we think about how a statistician actually wants our data to come, typically we don't get data in some pretty format, we get it in a spreadsheet. And spreadsheets are great, and those of you who are actuaries or accountants or several other professions, you know, data is in spreadsheets and that's how you work. And so there are commands that you can use within spreadsheets in order to make them better. And in fact, that handout that I have attached, it has a whole page about particularly how to work in spreadsheets. This class is about R for the most part. Pivot tables, we have that lab on, but certainly Excel is a fine thing and spreadsheets are a fine thing. So I'm going to refer to an article from Carl Broman and Carl Wu, and the web page that comes from that, again, is linked from this talk. But one of their main points is that often the fewest touches is the best. So if somebody offers to send you data and they offer to clean it before they send it, what you'd really like to have is have them explain it to you rather than to have them go in and manipulate it. Because again, you need to have this trail of how the data is cleaned. If the data is collected from a machine, we want to get it straight from the machine. If it's collected from Scantron surveys or a web-based survey, we'd like to get those raw results directly to us. Then we could use R to document all the changes that we make to the file to clean it so that somebody else could start with that same raw file and get to the file at the end. Okay, so Broman's article, it's kbroman.org, and it is an actual article you can get from the American Statistician as well. But he has kind of a series of rules that are great for using in spreadsheets, but they also work well when you're in software like R. So one idea he talks about is the idea that we want to make a consistent naming system, both for file names, variable names, how we code responses. I think the earlier assignment had strongly disagree B1 and strongly agree B7, and that's fine, but other systems use strongly disagree as -3 and agree as +3. That lets you have neutral as a 0. And I don't know that one of them is magically better than the other, but you want to be consistent throughout your document, and you want to make sure that future people will know what it is. Typically, we want to avoid empty cells. An empty cell is a sign that data is not there, that we somehow lost it. So using the blank itself for R data purposes is typically not done. In R, NA is what you use. In some of the older systems, -999 was used for blank data, and that works okay. But if you try to compute an average or a standard deviation, it just sticks it in like a number, and those negative numbers could throw you for a loop or at least give you kind of crazy results. 0 is especially bad to use. 0 should be the absence of something rather than a missing something. And back in this data set from Dr. Kim's class, again, cups of coffee, if it's blank, does that mean it was a 0? Or does that mean the person skipped the question? And as it is right now, we just don't know. And so anything we can do to minimize that would be good. Similarly, we want to avoid special characters. Typically, we want to use letters, numbers, a period for dot, and the underscore, and just use those characters in things. We've already seen how things like back quotes are used in a special way, or how %sign greater than % is that special pipe used in the tidyverse. But using weirder characters can actually do that. Even spaces can sometimes mess you up, or it requires you to use quotes around your data or that kind of thing. Lots of people like to use what we call camel case because it has humps on it, where you use capital letters a couple extra times. And that's a fine thing again, but you do have to watch out because sometimes software will take away your smaller capital letters, especially older systems will turn everything into a capital letter. And again, I think we're mostly done with that now, but if you are using one of the older systems, you could see that. So you wouldn't want to rely on the camel case. So you wouldn't want to have, stat data with a small here and a capital here and a capital here. But for you to read it more easily, that totally makes sense. All right, about dates. So Dr. Thatcher actually has very strong opinions about this. I may be a little bit less strong than he is, but the idea that there is a best format for dates. And this format that has the 4-digit year, the 2-digit month, and the 2-digit day, as shown here on the screen. What's great about that is now you can sort that without using any kind of special knowledge of the data system. I think I've mentioned the LubriDate package is part of tidyverse that's specifically for dates. But if you have data even in a character variable in this format, you can sort it or arrange it and it will come out exactly correctly. Similarly, if you use this format, you don't have to worry about being confused about the European or international standard where you put the day and then the month and then the year. Here, it always goes from biggest to smallest. You do want to watch about how Excel will sometimes transfer your dates into some other format, like number of days since January 1st, 1900, or something like that. We've talked about tidy data a little bit before, and even in the last talk we had, but this idea where tidy data has each row is an individual or an observation, each column is a variable, and the overlap should be a single data point. You do want to watch for things where you put multiple variables in one cell. So in shoe size 8.5W, there's a way in which that's one shoe size, but turning that into 2 variables is actually a lot clearer. In your data file, you want to avoid having calculations. Certainly Excel is good at that, and it can do that calculation or cleaning for you, or it can combine variables. But your data set should just have raw data. Similarly, we want to have variables explicitly represented. So you could imagine making all the men in your study color those cells blue, all the women color those pink. Although, first of all, that's very old-fashioned and gendered of you, and it doesn't allow for additional genders. But more importantly, if you were to save this as a data file, those colors would disappear. I think it's fine to use color to help you see what's going on. So coloring your data in Excel so that I can see making the negative numbers red so that you can see where any losses are is good. But you also want to have the minus sign there, or you want to have a column called gender so that you can do that. When you've totally made your tidy file tidy, you can tell because the data set is a very clean rectangle, just like we talked about over here. Now, there are times when your data set is maybe multidimensional or it's inside a SQL database or some other data system. But typically data we're going to analyze at any one time exists as a rectangular file. That is something that would be cleanly seen in an Excel tab. We sometimes call that a flat file when we do that. Now, that article lists some good handling practices, and it kind of concludes with the idea that doing good data handling practice will save your life. And I think that's maybe a little bit overrated. But the idea that you can't find the file, or once you find the file, you don't know what it means. Again, this idea that you're collaborating with your past self, you want to make it easier for your future self, or even more if you're collaborating with a future different person who might not know you because you've gone on to another position, you've been promoted, or you're somehow not there, right? We've seen there are data collections that have been done for 100 years, and figuring out how those work does that. So as I mentioned, all of this is on this spreadsheet. You might even want to print this spreadsheet out. It has some very practical ideas of how this works. It lists both ideas that you could use in R or ideas you could use in a spreadsheet. It links to that Broman article so that you could get that. And I think it's just kind of a good resource to have. Okay, so that's the idea of tidy data and how we're going to treat it from here. And again, from here, we'll get to how to do the more specific coding a little bit later. So.